pay our speakers at Startup Grind, right? They pay us with their time. The time of these people like managers, directors, founders, VCs, investors, it's really precious. So we really appreciate their time sharing their stories here and how their companies work. So please, I'm gonna ask for two things. The first one is the music, because we wanna welcome Ingrid like a rock star. Second one is you're gonna stand up. You're gonna stand up at the count of 3. You're gonna give the warmest rock star applause to Ingrid. Give it up. All righty. Not bad, is it? Thank you. Yes. Yes.
You have to put this one on.
Oh, yeah, we're going to be here. All right. Can you hear us now? Yes?
Yeah, I wonder, is mine on as well?
Yeah.
Yeah?
All right, thank you for joining us. How many times have you been welcomed on stage as a rock star?
Never. So it was a pleasant surprise.
I was gonna introduce you, but I'm gonna start with the story of how I know Ingrid, right? I go to the Startup Grind conference in London last year. I introduced the CTO of Dow Jones and on stage. And I was like, wow, I don't know what these guys do. I know they're pretty important because they run like markets and stuff, right? I'm a tech guy, I'm a developer. So I introduced the CTO, which was kind of like easy for me because I'm a developer. But the thing is, afterwards I say, well, you're not in Barcelona, but if I can ever be helpful to you, you never know. You've got a contact there. We'll try to help you. I said, oh yeah, we've got someone in Barcelona. I will introduce you to her. Funny thing, we talk over email. We meet over coffee, and I say, well, I don't know, what's your plans over here? Can you share with me? Are you guys like opening an office? You want to see the market? Are you like on, exploration trip? And she says like, oh no, we've got an office for like 20 years here and 300 people. I said, what the heck? Can we start with that?
Yeah, we can, and it's actually perfect timing, right? So I was just saying to Alex earlier today that it is literally almost 20 years ago, right? So 20 years ago, and this goes into a little bit of corporate history, so bear with me. 20 years ago, Reuters at the time had an outsourcing contract with a company here, and that company was doing news indexing. So it was literally reading the news, tagging it with like specific categories, specific codes, and then send it off to one of their products. And contrary to what was happening 20 years ago, they decided that actually outsourcing wasn't such a great idea. They wanted to insource it. So they said to the company, you know what, give us the people that you already employ, we will hire some other people, and we'll start an office. And it was literally a back-end office. So I started at that same time, and I remember going to the interview, and it was dark. You felt like, oh, what am I doing here? Because it felt like a back-end office. Soon they realized, actually, that the people that they were hiring here and employing here, they were doing as good a job as the people they had in Paris, in Stockholm, in Frankfurt, in Milan. Not the cheapest cities, right? They are not cheap now. They definitely were not cheap 20 years ago. So they then decided that actually, you know what, we should just merge all of those people together in Barcelona, and Barcelona becomes the European hub for this news indexing. So that's what they did, and then over time they decided that actually some of the tasks that people were doing in London, they could move them to Barcelona as well. Back in 2003, I think, we were around 50 people, and then they decided that actually one of their businesses they wanted to focus on was risk and compliance. So anything that is related with anti-money laundering, anti-corruption, anti-bribery, they needed people who could actually create content. So people who would do research, secondary research, create databases, and they were adding people doing that here because we already had the language skills, we already had the talent who could do that, we already had access to the relevant sources, and that's kind of how it continued to grow. In 2006, in 1999, Reuters and Dow Jones merged. They had a joint venture, so we became part of the joint venture. In 2006, Reuters stepped away from that joint venture, so we became wholly owned with Dow Jones. So that's why we are called Dow Jones now. And that's the office. For a very long time, it was just us, so it was still back-end. It's no longer back-end office. It's actually one of the most amazing offices within Dow Jones. But it was just the people creating the content, doing all this research work. And since June this year, we actually added news to it as well. So Alex was saying as well, following the news, right, of the last few days where you see the market plummet.
I
don't know, I'm not a market specialist.
It's not your fault, is it?
Yeah, so we are not the index, right? We sold that a couple of years ago. But what we do is we write about the news, right? We write about the stock market. So we actually have a dedicated newsroom in the office as well with around 25 people. And what they do, day in, day out, they follow companies, mostly in Europe, and they write about their corporate events.
And I was going to ask you so that you could give a little bit more of an explanation about what you guys do here in Barcelona, because I felt like a rock star when you welcomed me to your office. So all of a sudden, I walk into their office because we always have this preparation talk and all of that. And she had organized this meeting with all the heads of different departments in Barcelona. It was like 8 people in the room. And I felt like, wow. And they're like, what can we do for you? Like, just let us know, ask us whatever, and we'll try to help. And it felt so important. So this is my way to pay you back. So can you give a little bit of an overview of the different departments you've got in Barcelona and what kind of projects are you doing?
Yeah. And I think one of the things to clarify, the name data strategy is kind of confusing, right? Because it can refer to so many different things. We tried to change it a couple of times, but every time we get stuck in some corporate process. So we are stuck with the name. But basically, the easiest way to look at what we do is we are responsible for all content within Dow Jones, with the exception of news. So news is its own department, but anything else that you see in any of the Dow Jones products, that goes through us. And that might be on the B2C side. So for those of you who read the Wall Street Journal, no longer in print in Spain, but online, who read Barron's, who use MarketWatch online, anything that you see in there that is related to market data, for example, that goes through my department. The second piece that we do is the B2B business as well. So we fully support the B2B business as well. And that is a much lesser known business that Dow Jones has, but it's actually a really big part of the overall company. We do both of these things, so supporting the B2C groups as well as the B2B groups through 2 ways. We either license content, so we sign agreements with data providers, with newspapers, with El País, La Vanguardia, and we process that data, we enhance it. As I said earlier, we index it, no longer manual, like we did 20 years ago. It's all automated, but we still do that. Or we do it through the creation of our own proprietary data, which is gathered through secondary research. And if you think about Dow Jones as a whole, as businesses, there's basically 3 businesses. There's the journal business, right? So Wall Street Journal, either online or in print. Print is still a really important part of the company and a really important part of the Wall Street Journal business. Then the second group we have within Dow Jones is called Dow Jones Media Group. The Media Group was created a couple of years ago, and it was really to give all the other media properties that were not the journal a chance to shine, because they're all smaller than the journal, so they were always overlooked when it came to that, right? So the properties that I mentioned previously, when you think about Barron's, when you think about MarketWatch, that is all housed within the Dow Jones Media Group. And then the third piece of Dow Jones is the B2B business, which within our company is called the professional information business. And there's 3 main products in there. One is Factiva. So for those of you who know Factiva, it's a great tool, but it's a news aggregation tool. So that's where all the content goes in. So all these licensing agreements that we have with all the newspapers, with all the magazines, it goes in there. It's available in 28 languages. It goes back more than 40 years. So if you have to do any research, that's the tool you need. More than 60% of the content that is in there sits behind the paywall, right? So you can't get access to it unless you go there. The second piece of the professional information business is newswires. So this goes back to what I was saying earlier, where we actually write about the stock market, right? So we distribute that news through terminals, directly through traders. And then the second piece that we focus on is wealth management. And then the last piece, which I also mentioned, is risk and compliance. So those are solutions that focus on the prevention of money laundering, corruption, bribery, etc.
One of the things that I found really interesting is you shared with me some reports about the ecosystem in Barcelona, right? Normally, There are companies who made it more publicly available, like Startup Genome, for instance. They are pretty famous for that. But you guys also compile this data and you analyze it and you provide insightful reports. Who's in charge of this, and how do you compile them? Where do you get like all the sources? And why do you do it?
Good question. It depends, right? So if you're talking about more the startup reports and the information that is there, we've been doing that for a very long time, since 1992. So that is one of the things that sets us apart from competitors, right? So if you look at Crunchbase, if you look at PitchBook, they've been doing it as well. Some of their methodologies are very, very similar to our methodologies, but they don't go back as far. So if you want to do comparison, if you want to look at how a market has evolved, what are some of the trends, being able to go back that far is a really good thing. And then the second thing that we do, which I think is actually really important, is the confirmation, because everyone uses press, they use press releases, news articles to see, oh, this company has received this round of investment, right? So if you take that at face value, you actually believe that this company has received this round of investment. If you now start calling the company, it actually turns out it wasn't really an investment, right? It was maybe a loan, it was maybe some debt structure, however it is. So by being able to confirm that, you provide extra validation to the information you provide.
That's really cool, because one of the things we see is like there's this huge bubble, this huge market bubble especially in VC, not only in Spain but also in Silicon Valley and everywhere else in the world, right? But the fact that you guys actually double check this, it makes it because we live in the era of the fake news, right? So at least you're a little bit more trustworthy than most of the other bands over there. What I wanted to ask is, let's go into the details of how you grew the office in Barcelona, because that story seems it's very interesting, because I think we can cover both the technical side, what were the technical challenges, and the human challenges, right? Because you've got this office running for 20 years, you had to go from 0 or whatever small team you guys had at the beginning when you in-housed all of that, to 300 people that you've got right now, right? So can you share a little bit in the beginning, how did you hire them, and why are you guys not in the radar? Why nobody knows that you're in Barcelona?
I don't know why we are not in the radar. And I think it's actually interesting because and you and I were talking about it earlier, right?
Yeah.
If you think about attracting engineers, if you think about tech development, everyone who came up on stage is everyone was looking for developers.
Yeah,
it's a very competitive market. So I think if we were to operate in that space, we would have to do much more of getting out there. We are not, right? So our market is far less competitive. And Barcelona turns out to be a really good place for hiring people. What we are looking for is mostly people who speak multiple languages. So we cover all of Europe, Africa, Latin America, and ex-Soviet Union republics out of Barcelona. So we want people who speak languages, but even more importantly, we actually want native speakers. So if we need someone with Russian, we want someone who's a native Russian speaker, because not only do they speak the language, they actually understand the media, they understand what sources they can trust, they, by default, understand the political structure, the corporate structure, so that is really important. And there's loads of people here who come to Barcelona, who either come for a year as Erasmus, we have loads of ex-Erasmus students, who stick around and then need to find a job, and then they come to us, and they actually realize it's a really interesting job. It's challenging if you like not talking to people. That's what I always say, right? Because you're behind, it's true. You're behind your laptop or you're behind your computer and you're doing this secondary research. It's about finding this one detail that nobody else can find, right? It's about caring that the round of investment you input is actually the correct amount, right? That is the kind of people that we look for. So we don't care about degrees. As long as you have a degree, whatever your degree is, it doesn't really matter. So we have obviously a lot of people who studied linguistics, but we have people who studied law, people who studied history, we have engineers, we have people who studied biology. It's a real mix, but what we are looking for is people with languages who are really passionate about data. And it's not difficult to find people. It continues to be easy, I say. I don't have to do the hiring anymore, but...
it's not developers, yeah.
It's not developers. It makes a big difference, right? From a technical point of view, I sometimes wish I was a startup because this is a 130 years old company. So you have to deal with a lot of legacy issues, right? So you see people around you moving very fast and you can't move as fast. So that is sometimes a challenge.
Is that the first of the technical challenges you've got in what we were going to cover, right? How to?
I think it is the biggest one, right? Because there is just, you have to deal. There's two. I mean, they are both related, right? So you have to deal with legacy. Some of the technology systems that you have are not as new, not as up to date. So even though you would like to introduce a new technology, if your backend systems can't deal with that, then you can't really do it. And then secondly, we have a very large client base, which you have to continue to serve. So experimenting becomes a little bit more difficult. Having said that, I do think that what we haven't really done a good job of is when we talk to clients about what we do, we always stress the importance of the human, right? Because it's the human research, it's this attention to detail. By default, clients then believe that we don't use any technology, which is of course not true, right? So going back to this manual indexing of news that we used to do back in '98, we haven't been doing that manually since 2003.
How do you do it nowadays?
We do it through natural language processing. We use technology that we license, but then we augment it. We swap sometimes from technology. Last year we did a recent project where we actually swapped from one technology to the other technology. And the challenge is doing that in 28 languages, right? So very often when we talk to startup companies who want to pitch something to us, they say, oh, it's great, I've covered the UK public companies. And you think, yeah. So what about those companies in Syria, right? Can you do companies in Iran and Farsi? That is when it becomes challenging.
Does it feel a little bit patronizing? Is it like, yeah, you're doing good, child, you know?
No, it doesn't, because it depends on the technology, right? Yeah. So that's definitely not what I meant, but I do think that going back to the challenges, right? So depending on what your focus is, it's easier to develop something. If your focus is very broad, it becomes more challenging to develop something that covers everything. So sometimes you have to look at it in piecemeal and you deal with one thing at a time.
How about that would be a good challenge, right? And because all the companies suffer from legacy, even if it's like legacy from 3 weeks ago, nowadays in startups is something that it's constantly evolving, but even more so in a company it's 110 years old, 113 I think you said, right? So what other kinds of challenges have we got in scaling an office from 0 people to 300? So like hiring wasn't too much of a challenge?
No, to me the biggest challenge is keeping the family feeling in the office, right? So if you are 20 people, if you are 60 people, even if you are 100 people, you can still create this one team feeling, right? Everyone goes towards the same goal. You know everyone by name. If you see someone walking in the office, you actually know who they are, you know their background, you know a lot about them. And as a result of that, the engagement is very easy, right? People feel engaged, they buy into the company. If you get to 300 people, that's no longer the case because it's simply too big, right? So I admit I do not know the names of all the 300.
I was going to ask about that, yeah.
I don't. It's too many people. But that's a challenge, right? Because if you want to keep people engaged and if you want to make sure that they actually consider you to be more than just a company they work for, then how do you do that? And I think I haven't found the answer yet. But that is, to me, the most challenging part because we want people to feel part of something bigger than just a company name.
Relating to that, how about company culture? What are the values of the Dow Jones as a company and how did you manage not to break them when you scale, at least in Barcelona?
That's a good question. I think that the most important value is and you spoke about fake news earlier.
Yeah.
It is about the quality of the data and the accuracy of the data. And that sounds really boring, but actually it's not, right? So when we look at some of our competitors, the reason why we win deals is because of the quality of the data, right? So making sure that people understand that people really believe that the accuracy, the trust that people have in you is the most important thing. That is a big part of the culture. The second part, I think, is going back to what I was saying earlier. It's more than just a company name, right? So it is about giving people autonomy to do the things that they, not so much that they want to do. They have objectives, but I don't really mind how you get to that objective, right? As long as you get there. So there's a lot of flexibility, and this is back in 2003, 2004. We started working from home, so people had the opportunity to work from home full-time. Back then, that wasn't happening in Spain, right?
No, at all. Still not happening, so.
Yeah, so giving people the flexibility of that, being truly international and being truly inclusive. So always being aware of the people who are around you, being sensitive to their cultural backgrounds, I think is one of the other core values as well.
Yeah, that brings me into the case of diversity. I want to cover this because at a certain point, it might even become like a challenge in a company to find people specifically for the regions of the news you want to deal with or the data you want to deal with, right? So I was going to ask. So you mentioned, I remember in the meeting I mentioned earlier, you're from the Netherlands. I remember somebody from Poland, somebody from France, Moldova, and Russia, if I remember correctly. And I think there were a couple others, but I think a couple others that were from here, right? So, and they were, the managers of the area. So how important is that these people also feel represented in the management positions in Dow Jones in order to hire more people from lower positions?
Yeah, I think it's important. I think what is interesting about that question is that we don't really look at nationalities, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes I'm being blamed for living in this bubble, right? Where everyone is global and everyone speaks at least 5 languages and has lived in 5 different countries, because that's kind of the background of the people we hire. That's of course not a reality, but within that bubble, it is a reality. And you are so used to the fact that anyone can be from any country that you don't think about that. So when you hire someone, when you interview someone from a management position, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right? As long as you speak English, then we are happy to have you there.
And how about you go find them in the specific regions? Because let's say you want to cover the Basque country, right? Good luck in understanding Basque if you're not Basque. But how do you go and find these kind of people?
That's a challenge.
And fetch them to Barcelona.
And that's a challenge. And it's always getting the first one, right? So I mentioned the Iranian companies earlier. And in order to cover them and to understand the ownership structure, you need to speak Farsi. And for a very long time we tried, and it was just impossible to find anyone who spoke Farsi. And then finally, I think maybe 3 years ago, we managed to find one person. The one person then normally leads you to the second person and to the third person. So it's always finding that one person.
Oh, yeah, actually, I was going to say, from the terms of hiring, I know you guys don't have the challenge of hiring developers, or at least not yet, that I know of. But how do you see, like, you are being clearly leaders in the market, and especially here in Barcelona, where people wouldn't expect that Dow Jones is here? I assume that when you post a job offering online, then it just goes away in like a couple minutes because you've got a lot of applicants. Isn't it like that? Or
in general, it is, and I know.
I would feel attracted to this kind of offer, right?
I think in general people do. It was funny because we were talking to Ironhack actually, and they were making fun of us because we still use InfoJobs. And InfoJobs works really well for us. It does, but it's very explicit, right? It's we need someone who speaks Armenian, right? So there's not that many people who speak Armenian. The interesting, going back to the question about challenges, I think the most surprisingly, the most challenges we have when we want to hire is actually with German.
The Germans?
Yeah.
Why do you think it is like that? They don't like Barcelona? I don't think it's the case.
I think it is because the job market for German speakers is more competitive, and their expectations as a result of that are not necessarily the expectations that we can meet.
Salary-wise, I think we've got this slightly a little bit of room for improvement, but that would be a good lesson learned. I was going to say, like, what have you learned in the process of growing your office to 300 people that you want to share with people here? Because obviously, it's not the same to grow it in like 3 months or 1 year, like it happens with the startups. You did over the course of 20 years, right? So you have seen different technology changes. You've got like economic crisis. You've got like really big changes to the city in this last years. So what have you learned that you think you can share with the audience when they want to scale a company in terms of hiring? Besides using InfoJobs, that's a good one, yeah. Not our sponsors, by the way.
Exactly. I'm trying to think, actually, what the answer to that question is. I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, right? So trying to keep trying to treat the company as if it was still a company of 20 people, I think is important, and that is really challenging. But if you manage to do that, that definitely helps. I also think that by almost being open to anything, that helps as well, right? So never say no, because if you say yes, you will find a solution for it. Not being afraid of challenges. We've had some really tough challenges during the years, and rather than hide from them, just affront them, I think helps as well.
I was going to ask also in the terms of like going deeper into diversity, and it's quite an issue right now in order like to balance the gender issue, right? And when hiring, but I noticed in that meeting of 8 people, there were more women than men in the room, which to me was kind of disruptive in Barcelona, because I'm used to that when I go to San Francisco, but I'm not used to it, or not even there, but definitely not in Barcelona. So how did you accomplish this, and what can you share with the audience in terms of also attracting women to work for your company?
I think there's 2 things to that. One is, again, it was just natural. Part of that is because of so if you think about, if you go to universities and you go to language departments, the majority there are women as well, right? So if we have a majority of people who have a degree in linguistics, by default, a larger group of that is going to be women. The second piece is actually flexibility. And one of the things that we are seeing at Dow Jones, not necessarily in Barcelona, but in other offices where there is less room for flexibility, is that women stay until they are 30 and then suddenly they drop off, right? And one of the things that we are very keen of is ensuring that you have enough flexibility, so the working from home really helps. If you now suddenly have a family, I have to pick up my children from school, the fact that I can work from home, just go to school, pick them up and continue working, that really helps. Over summer, we actually allow people to go back to their home country and work from their home country. That is one of the major benefits, right? Because if you're not from here and you want to go and see your family, if you have to give up vacation, people don't really want to do that, right? And I have to go on holiday to see my parents. But if you allow them to actually work from their parents' home, so without giving up their holiday, that's a major benefit. So just being flexible around that, I think, helps. Not so much attract women, but definitely retain them.
It seems to me that despite being a corporate that's been just existing for over 100 years, you have learned some things from the startups, right? Especially when it comes to hiring, when it comes to adapting to changes, probably not technologically, but we can work on that a little bit later. But you have done it indeed when it comes to like this equilibrium, this balance between work and life, right? What other things have you learned from startups? Or what other policies have you adopted that you probably thought, if we don't do this, we're going to be screwed, like no one's going to join?
It is actually the technology, right? Because you have to learn. Because if you only look inside, you will never advance. And in order to learn, you have to look outside and you have to look at what other companies are doing. And what I think is interesting, some of the fields we are in are fairly traditional, but there's a lot of startup companies who are trying to get into that same space, right? So by staying close to those startup companies, you see what they are doing and you see what's working and what's not working, right? And that's, I think, what makes it interesting. And we are constantly talking to them to actually learn to see how we can partner together. And there are instances where you can and instances where you can't.
I don't know to what level of detail you can give an answer to this question, but for me, it's really difficult when I try to understand how do companies use, big data to analyze whether that's fake news or not. I wanted to go a little bit, just slightly overview a little bit the technical side of this. You've got people double checking the facts, but in order to double check the facts, are you double checking all of them, or do you specify just a set of them that you think they can be controversial because the big data has pointed out that this might be, controversial or just not true?
No, that's a good question.
Do you check all the facts or just a subset of them?
So it depends, because it depends on the data that we are talking about.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about the startup data, then we try to check all the facts. Sometimes we can, and sometimes we can't. So it depends on there. But that universe isn't as big, and also the people are willing to talk to you, right?
Yeah.
So if you call up a startup company, you talk to the CEO, most of the times they will at least tell you something. Maybe not everything you want to know, but at least you get a piece of information. The other piece of the data that we create is what I mentioned earlier, is what's related to anti-money laundering, anti-corruption. And in that instance, we actually collect data either about politicians or about alleged criminals. In that case, we can't confirm, right? I can't really call up a local counselor here in Spain and say, so your date of birth.
Yeah.
So it becomes much harder, and this is where the veracity or the trustworthiness of the sources that you use come into play, right? So when I am covering Spain, I want to make sure that I use reliable sources as opposed to sources that are less reliable. So I remember in the beginning, this data was being created out of London, and they would include Hola as a source, right? And we're like,
Great, yeah.
I'm not sure about that one, right?
Fox News.
But if I read something in El País, and I can then actually double check that either on a government website, or I can double check that in another source as well, at some point I have to assume it's true.
Yeah, especially nowadays with El País, you got to double check everything they say. But I'm gonna be canceling this out. Sorry about this. No, I just wanted to say, because what happens if somebody, when you call them to double check some facts, they lie to you? Can you spot them? Has that ever happened?
That's a good question. I'm not the one calling. There's someone in the audience who does the calling.
Who can answer this question, please? Stand up, say your name, and answer this question.
So I'm Sophia. I work at Dow Jones. I work for the Department of Venture Capital, Venture Source. You met some of my colleagues.
Yeah.
We had very few cases where the company actually lied. But I mean, since we are very senior, like we have senior researchers, we are experienced, and most of the times, I mean, you can compare the data through other sources. The other thing that we always try to do, I mean, if we are really a bit suspicious that this such a big round of financing of 200 million euros without any investors, or with an investor like Axel Partners, we also try to contact the investors if that's the case, and the investors most of the times are quite receptive.
All right, thank you. Yeah, there's this source I'm using nowadays. It's called Unicornio en Paro. I don't know if you know it, but it's a Twitter account. It's great because they're just leaking some information from the startup scene. So you might want to follow that one because they're just sharing some interesting facts about some companies in Barcelona and Madrid especially. I just wanted to go and ask, because Startup Grind, we are a community of entrepreneurs. We're everywhere. We're probably not as everywhere as you guys are, because it seems like you're covering the entire globe. But one of our core values is to help first, right? So how can a community like Startup Grind, being virtually in every country of the world, every city, if you will, how can we help you? How can we help Dow Jones? Tricky question.
Yeah,
$1 million.
It's a good question. I have to be careful. The answer is only get one wish. I think going back to what I was saying earlier, right? So I think that we can always learn from startups, and I think one of the biggest dangers in our business is if you actually close your eyes and you dismiss them, because that's not going to happen. And if you're not careful about it, they will take away your business, right? So rather than dismiss them, you have to be friends with them, as you pointed out on your board and one of your values. So I actually think just allowing for this forum to happen and for us to get closer to some of the startups, I think that would be of great help.
And in turn, how can you help the community over here? How can Dow Jones help the startups? And what are you doing with startups worldwide?
The honest answer is we are not doing that much with startups. So that is not necessarily, I think, where we can help. I do think, going back to some of the questions you were asking earlier, right? How do you scale? How do you make sure that you hire the right talent? Those are things that we can help with, as in we are always open to talk to anyone about it, right? And one of the things we've definitely learned is how to hire great talent and to keep them, which is not easy. If you look at the retention rate, it's extremely low.
I was going to ask, one of the next questions also revolves around Barcelona, because every guest speaker that we've got over here, they just mentioned the fact that Barcelona is great for attracting talent and retaining them, right? So what are the key things that your employees value the most about Barcelona? Because we don't work that hard as the Germans, probably. Is it that one?
That's what the execs in New York go, I think.
Yeah,
so you're
exactly.
just sitting on the beach.
But what other things do you think they value?
No, so I think you split it into two parts, right?
Yeah.
So part is their personal life, and it is how great the city is. Everyone has different aspects of the city that they like, but there's always pieces. So that is their personal reasons why they are here, why they want to stay here. From a work perspective, I think it goes back to the flexibility. It goes back to the international environment in which they work. And the challenging work, the work is something that they really, really like.
And where do you think we're headed as a city? Where do you see Barcelona like 5, 10 years? Do you think we're going to improve? We're going to go like down the drain?
No, that's a trick question.
That's a tricky.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask easy questions, yeah.
I don't know is the answer.
You've been here for a while. So
yeah, I've been here for 20 years.
Yeah, not bad. You can spot some trends, maybe.
I think what's exciting, if you look back maybe 10 years ago, I think Barcelona, almost from an entrepreneur perspective, was more traditional than it is currently. And I think that if the city as a whole manages to continue to attract entrepreneurs, startup companies with an international view, that will only help make the city more interesting.
One hard question, another one, I guess. But you're living here for 20 years as an expat, and how did you find like living as an expat in Barcelona 20 years ago, and how is it now? Are we more welcoming now? Was it really hard in the beginning? Because Catalans are not the most welcoming people, I know that. So how do you see it as somebody as a newcomer like 20 years ago? How is it now? How do you perceive it with your new hires?
The thing that shocked me 20 years ago, so 20 years ago I moved from Holland to here. And in Holland I had a job as an engineer, and I was purchasing electronic components and telecom equipment. I am not an engineer, so my degree is definitely not in engineering. But I loved it, it was great. So I came here wanting to do exactly the same, and there was just no way anyone would give me a job without the engineering title. Never mind, I'd done the job for 5 years, right? So I think that is what shocked me most. So that took a while to actually get used to the fact that if you've studied linguistics, you can only be in that field and you can't really do anything else. I think that has changed. The other thing that I think has changed as well, which I think is very positive, so one of the things that we do each summer, we hire around 20 summer interns who come to work with us for 3 months. It's a paid internship, so they get paid exactly the same as anyone we would hire full-time. We work closely with universities here, but also abroad. But if I look at the universities here and people who are about to graduate here, they are so much better prepared, I think, than 20 years ago.
All right.
So I think that is definitely something I can notice, I can see, which is encouraging as well, right? Because I think it helps the city grow. As getting used to the city, what's the difference between now and 20 years ago? I don't know, because I'm here already, right? So.
Now, you mentioned something really, really great right now. You pay internships. Like that doesn't happen in Spain.
I know.
Why did you come up with this idea, and like, why? Now, most importantly, how that did contribute to your scaling the company? How many people you retain of these?
So it varies by year, right? So you have better years or not so good years.
Yeah.
I think in the best year, we had around, out of the 20 interns, we hired 5. But the more exciting thing about that is actually, out of those 5 interns we hired, 2 of them are currently working in the US, right? So they are full-time employees. 1 is actually working in the marketing department. Another one was promoted to manager. Another one was promoted to manager. So that's the exciting thing, right? Mm-hmm. So you use it as a recruitment tool.
Because one of the things we see in the startup world is you see companies trying to hire an intern for a CTO position, right? And that's just plainly wrong.
It's crazy. And I think, I mean, you have to think about what you let them do, right? If I ask them to do things that everyone else is doing, I should be paying them for the same.
And how do you train them? Because one of the challenges with interns is most of the startups are so busy, they cannot devote time into teaching them and learning them like the stuff they got to learn, right?
And it is a challenge,
yes.
right?
How do you got a specific department? You've got an onboarding process.
We do have an onboarding process, but it is a challenge. And what we try to do is we actually try to find specific projects for them as opposed to getting them into the day-to-day work. Because if it's a specific project, I only have to train you on this as opposed to like all these other guidelines and rules as well. So that is one way of dealing with it. We are lucky enough to have a lot of managers who can help with training, and then employees as well, right? So each intern is buddied to someone who's already in the company who can work with them. And then the other thing that we do as well, they work together on a project, right? So normally at the start of their internship, we give them a problem statement, and then by the end of it, they present to us some of their findings, and some are amazing. They come back with like fully developed apps, and you're like, okay.
Oh, wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
Let's wrap it up with a couple of quick questions. The first one is Donald Trump giving you more trouble, more work nowadays than it used to be, or how do you think that whole phenomenon affected the industry?
It's actually, so from a Wall Street Journal point of view, I think it has actually helped subscriptions.
Yes.
Going back to your comments about fake news,
yes.
People want a trusted source of news, right? They really do want to understand. So right now, from a Wall Street Journal subscription point of view, he's not hurting the business.
All right, that's a good one. And the second one, and the last question from my side before we open the floor for questions is, everybody has got a useless superpower. What is yours? Something you do exceptionally well, but you cannot use it anywhere? Or, yeah. Like, why did they learn this?
We have an interview question, which is actually, what is your superpower?
Yeah,
but
no,
we don't have the useless. I have no superpower, I think.
Not having a superpower would be a great useless superpower, by the way.
Yeah, I think so.
Everybody has got something like, you lock the car, you walk away 25 minutes, like, did I lock the car? And come back and check. Something that's me, by the way. Yeah.
I'm trying to think.
Giving you 10 seconds, no pressure.
So I think, I mean, it's not so I can talk about something that actually helps me, but I can also talk about something that is just really stupid that I do.
I think like ice breaking or something like that, chit-chatting?
So the stupid thing? I sometimes assume that I know what time my plane is leaving, which then means that I actually get to the airport 2 hours in advance. Unfortunately, the plane was like leaving 15 minutes ago, and the last time it happened, I was with my children, and they looked at me and they go like, does that happen at work as well?
That's actually a pretty impressive one. It must be like one of the best ones I've ever heard. I'm sorry, but because it probably costs you a lot of money, or the company.
The company.
But that's literally one of the best we've ever heard. So please give it up for Ingrid, and let's go with the Q&A. All right, Mark, our rock star for tonight, is going to be opening the questions over here. Adriano. First event, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Ingrid, great talk. And I don't know, like, maybe on the sense of like, how can you help us? I'm trying to participate in a little group that is truly trying to do like some studies on fact checking, maybe some data scientists from like, El Periódico, La Vanguardia, and maybe, if you could like come and also join. You're
Yeah,
invited for
we
that.
can definitely talk about that. So let's talk about that afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah?
All right.
For sure.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Let's point one thing out. Just generic questions, please. No specific pitching or something. One question per person. Thank you. It's always been like that. You come from the very first event. One question per person.
I would like to see how do you see the perspective of artificial intelligence about treating the fact-checking, and how do you see it in 3 or 5 years or whatever?
It's getting better every single time, right? So one of the internal discussions we have is what you call, what is AI, right? Because there's so many things you can spin things. But it's definitely getting better. So if you think about like 10 years ago, if we had to tell a machine that it needed to read news and then extract information from it, it might be doing an okay job with companies. It would do an awful job with individuals, right? So people's names are really difficult because I don't have, 10 years ago I needed to have a dictionary and then I could pick the names, I could extract the news from, the names from the news. Right now, I don't need a dictionary anymore, right? The machines have become so intelligent that it can automatically say this is a person, and then we need it more specific because if the person isn't judge, I'm not interested in it. The person is a criminal, I am interested in it. So it's getting better and better. We are using it. We are using it not only to do the news indexing, but we are using it to create a lot of the data, right? So we use it as a lead. We still have to verify, make sure that it's okay, but I think maybe not within 3 years' time, but let's say between 5 and 10 years' time, it will definitely be at a point where it will just go and create everything we do automatically.
Good question. Next thing it was, yeah.
Hello, Ingrid. So you was talking also about fake news, and this is a big concern to filter, let's say, the content. I was wondering if you are already prepared for the deep fake, for the videos that are very, very well made. And I read a very interesting article that it's quite scary and dangerous what they can do, even, I don't know, international conflicts maybe. So it's important to filter this.
Yeah, and I think that I'm going to answer it slightly differently because it's not necessarily my specialty, so I don't want to say anything that isn't necessarily true. What I can say about it is that Dow Jones is part of News Corp. And one of the companies that News Corp owns is called Storyful, and Storyful does exactly that, right? So what they do, they have around 100 journalists and they verify videos all the time. Any video that is on social, that's what they verify. And I think you all remember the video of the guy, the BBC person who was being interviewed, and the baby who was walking up behind him.
That was amazing, yeah. One of the highlights of last year.
And that is one of the videos. So what they do, they verify the origin of the video, and then they try to license it as quickly as possible. So that is one way in which not necessarily Dow Jones, but News Corp in a broader sense is actually contributing towards ensuring the veracity of some of the videos.
Just a short clarification for non-tech people in the audience, if you haven't heard the question, it's like, how do you do the deep fake videos, which is videos that you can actually, how do you say, like replace somebody's mouth or facial features, and it looks like they're actually saying something. Like you can have President Obama saying something really nasty, and it looks like freaking real, and it's very scary, right? So that goes to that question. Yeah, that's a really good question. You got any other one before we wrap it up? Yep, gentlemen.
You say that you are actively looking at the competence of probably maybe startups and such, but how does Dow Jones feels about the current blockchain industry, that it's so volatile and getting so powerful, lots of ECOs replacing EPOs sometimes, doing scams, not doing scams, and everywhere in the world. How does Dow Jones feels about it?
Good question.
So I want to make sure that I understand the question correctly. Are you asking about how Dow Jones want to use blockchain, or are you using a slightly different question?
Whether you can verify the authenticity of the ICOs.
Of course, if Dow Jones is looking blockchain as an investment tool in a serious way, or if they are ignoring it by now.
Yeah, okay, that's a good question.
Yeah.
What I can say is that we are definitely looking into it, and I think if you look at it from my department perspective, the most interesting thing that blockchain offers is how it can help in verifying data, right? We have ideas on that, and we are currently figuring out what it is that we can and can't do. But I think that if it's an opportunity, but it's also a threat, right? Because I think ultimately you can use it, going back to this like whole confirmation of data, if you find a way where you can actually use the blockchain to verify that, now suddenly I can kind of crowdsource my data, but with a much higher degree of trust than when I normally crowdsource it.
Perfect. Last one, maybe? One over there. We wrap it up.
Hello, Ingrid. First of all, thank you for your conference. And I have a question about you are in head of data. And the question is about legally, we're talking about where is data located? And do you think that it's going to change? Do you think now it's good? How is it? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's challenging, and we see it mostly actually in the risk and compliance space, where there is this infinite balance between data protection, so I can hold as little data as possible, and data openness. Financial institutions need to know as much as possible about a certain person. In Europe, especially, there is much more focus on data privacy. So in May of this year, GDPR is coming into play, and that really changes the way we can process data, and more importantly, data we can hold on certain people. So it's mostly focused on individuals, but if I deal with criminals, to what extent can I actually deal with that? There's two cases going on in the UK right now, which are linked to Google and the right to be forgotten, right? So to what extent does that affect us as well? Hosting data is challenging. If you think about Russia, for example, that's a huge challenge because all the data you hold there, you have to hold in Russia, right? So now as a global company, what do I do? Because I normally don't have a data center there.
All right, good one. Let's wrap it up here. Please give it up for her, for Ingrid. All right.